The glowing digits on the nightstand clock blinked 4:17 a.m. when Jonas leaned over and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead. It was his usual farewell, soft, brief, and wrapped in routine. Another early departure for work, another week where I'd shoulder the duties of both parents alone. Through the curtain of half-consciousness, I listened as he moved quietly around the bedroom, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. I didn't stir. I'd grown skilled at feigning sleep, years of practice helping me become a master at masking awareness. It had become easier than engaging at such an hour. From behind closed eyes, I tracked every sound. The soft click of the closet door, the rustle of fabric, the weight of his briefcase being lifted. "Love you," he whispered, his voice low, warm breath brushing against my cheek. I didn't respond, not because I didn't love him, but because that had become our routine. He'd whisper those words, and I would pretend to sleep. 7 years of marriage to a man who was gone as often as he was home had taught me to treasure quiet moments, even in separation. The faint sound of our front door opening and closing signaled his exit. Through the bedroom window I watched the twin beams of his headlights sweep across the lawn as he backed his sleek black Audi out of the driveway. Supposedly off to Montreal, another logistics summit, another client meeting. I curled deeper into the warmth of our bed, trying to cling to the remaining hours before the day officially began. But sleep remained elusive. Instead, I lay there, letting my thoughts drift, cataloging our life. The sprawling colonial home nestled in a tidy, affluent neighborhood, the private education we gave our daughter Evie, the carefully managed investments in annual vacations. On paper, everything was ideal, almost curated. Sometimes it felt too perfect, like we were characters in a story we were trying to convince ourselves was real. But wasn't that what everyone did? Build an illusion they could live inside? By 6:30 a.m. I was in the kitchen, still groggy but moving through familiar motions. Evie loved banana pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, so I poured the batter onto the griddle with the precision of a sculptor. The sizzle was comforting. A small sound of order in a life filled with so many moving parts. Light footsteps made their way down the staircase. Evie, 6 years old and impossibly observant, entered the room wearing her favorite unicorn pajamas. "Morning, sunshine," I greeted, flipping a pancake. She climbed onto the stool at the kitchen island and tilted her head. "Is Daddy gone?" "Yep, left early this morning. He'll be back Friday night." I placed a warm plate of pancakes in front of her. "Eat up, kiddo. We've got to leave for school in 20 minutes. As she quietly ate, I started cleaning up. While wiping the counter, something caught the light. A familiar glint near the coffee machine. I reached over and picked up Jonas's watch, the Omega Seamaster I had given him for our 5th wedding anniversary. My heart skipped. He never traveled without that watch, ever. Once, years ago, we'd been halfway to the beach when he realized he'd forgotten it. He made us turn around to retrieve it. I rubbed my thumb over its cold, polished surface. "That's strange," I murmured, mostly to myself. "What's strange, Mommy?" Evie asked, her mouth full of pancake. "Daddy forgot his watch," I said, slipping it into my jeans pocket. "I'll keep it safe until he gets back." After dropping Evie off at Oak Ridge Elementary, I made my usual stop at the local cafe. The aroma of freshly ground beans filled the air as I waited in line. My phone buzzed with a notification, a forwarded email from Jonas. It was the hotel confirmation, the Bonaventure in Montreal. He had checked in. I felt a strange mix of relief and validation. He always did this for sent confirmations to let me know he'd arrived safely. A small gesture, but one that reassured me. The day blurred into its typical rhythm: groceries, laundry, phone calls. As I folded towels in the laundry room, I heard the front door open and Evie's excited voice ring out. "We're home." Nicole, our neighbor and closest friend, had picked her up from school. She appeared in the doorway with a casual smile, yoga mat slung over her shoulder and her blonde hair tied back. "Thanks again," I said, folding a towel neatly. "No problem," Nicole replied. "Everything okay? You look a little tired." I shrugged. "Just another week solo. Jonas left for Montreal this morning." Something flickered across her face. Surprise. Confusion. "Montreal," she repeated. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Why?" She hesitated. "Nothing. Just, I thought I saw him at Riverside Cafe around lunch, but I must have been mistaken." A strange, heavy sensation settled in my stomach. "You must be," I said, too quickly. "He texted me from the airport and I got the hotel confirmation." Nicole nodded slowly, but her expression didn't ease. "Yeah, I guess I was just seeing things. Gotta run, dinner and all that." Once she left, I stood alone in the laundry room, her words echoing in my mind. No. Jonas was in Montreal. I had evidence. Still, doubt crept in like a draft through a cracked window. Later, while stirring pasta sauce, Evie appeared beside me, tugging my sleeve. Her face was pale, lips tight with worry. "We have to go," she said softly. "Go where, sweetheart?" I asked, not turning from the stove. "Just go, we can't stay here tonight." I turned and knelt down to meet her gaze. "Why not, baby? Did something happen?" She looked away, biting her lip. "Daddy said you'd understand." My breath caught. When did Daddy say that? I don't know, but he said we can't be here tonight. Was this a dream, or did Daddy tell you this while he was home? It was a dream. Her voice trembled. "Please, Mommy, I'm scared." I hugged her tightly, trying to calm the storm rising inside me. "We're safe," I whispered. "This is our home." But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them anymore. That night, after I tucked Evie into bed and double-checked that every window and door was locked, I sat alone at the dining table, the house silent around me. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Jonas's watch lay on the table, its ticking unnervingly loud. I stared at it, willing it to offer some kind of explanation. It didn't. The sleek timepiece mocked me with its stillness. Questions I didn't want to entertain began to worm their way through my thoughts. Why had he left it behind when I knew he never did? Was it a mistake? A slip of habit? Or was it intentional? Something about it felt deliberate, like he wanted me to notice it. And then there was Nicole. Her expression hadn't just been surprise. It had been recognition. She'd seen someone she was sure was my husband in our own town, while he was supposedly hundreds of miles away. Sleep that night came in fits and starts. I awoke repeatedly, heart pounding, unsure what had stirred me. Once I thought I heard footsteps outside our bedroom window, but when I peered through the blinds, the front yard was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. By morning, I was running on caffeine and adrenaline. Evie was unusually quiet at breakfast, barely touching her toast. Her big brown eyes seemed distant, as if she were trying to work through something far beyond her years. I considered pressing her again about what she'd said the night before, but something in her demeanor made me pause. She was scared, truly scared, and I didn't want to overwhelm her. As I drove her to school, I found myself checking the rearview mirror more often than usual. Every car seemed like it might be following us. I knew I was being paranoid, but logic couldn't compete with the unease festering inside me. When I returned home, I booted up Jonas's old laptop, the one he used to use before he got a work-issued one. He'd kept it in the home office, largely forgotten. I wasn't expecting to find anything, really, but maybe, just maybe, there'd be some email, some message that could explain the strange gap between what I knew and what Nicole had seen. The laptop took forever to load, its age showing in the sluggishness of the system. I sifted through old folders, receipts, travel itineraries, nothing out of the ordinary. Just when I was about to give up, I noticed a folder buried deep within the documents, one labeled Miscellaneous Reports. Inside were PDFs of shipping manifests and port clearances. Odd, but not incriminating. Still, it was strange he hadn't mentioned these documents. They weren't connected to any project I remembered him talking about. And then there was one file, encrypted. My stomach dropped. I clicked it, but it required a password. I tried his birthday, Evie's name, our wedding date, nothing worked. Suddenly, the laptop screen flickered. A message popped up, brief and strange. "If you're reading this, it's already started." My breath caught in my throat. I slammed the laptop shut and backed away from the desk. My hands were shaking again. That message, was it some kind of prank, or had Jonas left it for me? And what exactly had already started? I glanced toward the window, heart racing. The street outside was still and quiet, but I no longer trusted stillness. I no longer trusted anything. A strange tension settled over me like fog after Nicole's unsettling observation and Evie's sudden eerie fear. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps Nicole had truly mistaken someone else for Jonas. Perhaps Evie had a nightmare, her imagination weaving shadows into threats. Still, as I cleaned up the kitchen after dinner, my unease only deepened. The logical explanations I clung to began to feel paper-thin, like they would tear under the weight of even a light breeze. I found myself wandering into Jonas's study, hesitating at his desk. The laptop sat there closed, innocuous, yet it radiated something more now. I sat down and opened it, the screen lighting up with a prompt for his password. My fingers hovered over the keys. Our anniversary, no access. Evie's birthday, nope. I sighed, frustrated, until an old instinct kicked in. I typed his mother's maiden name, followed by the year we met. The screen blinked. The desktop appeared. My breath caught. I was in. I shouldn't have felt like a trespasser in my own home, but I did. Each folder I opened felt like peeling back the skin of something I didn't want to see. Most were mundane expense reports, software manuals, family photos. Then I saw it. a folder titled K2. It didn't ring any bells. With a mounting sense of dread, I opened it. It contained dozens of PDF files, shipping manifests, custom clearance forms, invoices for shell companies I didn't recognize. The documents were crammed with dense logistics terminology, ports, serial numbers, quantities. None of it made sense to me. It was technical, almost clinical. But the volume alone told me it wasn't trivial. I was about to close the laptop when an icon on the desktop caught my attention. The security camera app. Jonas had installed our home surveillance system himself last year, saying it was for our safety. I clicked the icon. A grid of thumbnail footage opened, showing feeds from all around the house, driveway, front door, backyard. I scrubbed through today's footage. Everything looked normal. The footage played in fast forward, but then something odd. The backyard feed jumped, a 30-minute gap. I rewound, played it again. The footage jumped from 2:04 p.m. to 2:34 p.m., completely missing the middle. My heart began to pound. Someone had removed the footage. It wasn't a glitch. That night, as I tucked Evie into bed, she gripped my hand suddenly, her small fingers pressing hard. "Please, Mommy," she whispered, eyes wide and pleading. "Can we sleep somewhere else tonight?" I tried to keep my voice calm. "We're perfectly safe here," I said, forcing a smile. She didn't seem convinced. Her gaze lingered toward the darkened window. I kissed her forehead and moved to turn off her light when the deep, sharp bark of the neighbor's German shepherd cut through the silence. I froze, then walked to her window and peered outside. The motion light in our backyard blazed on. I pulled out my phone and checked the live feed. The camera showed nothing, just empty yard and shadows. "See?" I said lightly, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "Probably just a raccoon or something." Bea didn't respond. She curled up under her blanket, still watching the window. Sleep did not come easily. I lay in bed, listening to every sound, the settling of the house, the creaks of old floorboards, distant pipes groaning. I kept my phone nearby, the security feed open on the screen. I must have dozed off at some point. It was just past 2 a.m. when Evie's screams shattered the silence. I shot upright, disoriented but already moving. In her room, I found her sitting bolt upright, tears streaming down her face. "They were in the hallway," she gasped between sobs. "I heard them. I heard the floor creak." I scooped her into my arms, holding her close. "It's just the house, baby," I whispered. "Old houses make noises." But even as I said it, my eyes kept darting to the door, half expecting to see it swing open. Morning came slowly. I had barely slept. Sunlight slanted through Evie's curtains, catching in her tangled hair. I hadn't left her side. She'd finally drifted off again just before dawn, and I must have fallen asleep beside her. My body ached, but my mind felt razor sharp. The pieces were adding up. Jonas's forgotten watch, Nicole's sighting, deleted footage, my daughter's terror, individually explainable. Together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. I slipped out of bed and moved quietly through the house. Behind thick winter coats in our bedroom closet was an emergency bag I'd kept out of habit. My father had been unpredictable, and my mother taught me always to have a fallback plan. Inside were essentials, cash, documents, a prepaid phone. In 20 minutes, I gathered clothes, Evie's favorite stuffed rabbit, my laptop, medicine, and enough food for a couple of days. I scribbled a note on the kitchen counter. "Jonas, Evie has been asking to visit Beth, taking her to my sister's for a few days. I'll call you when we get there." Jonas didn't know Beth and I hadn't spoken in over a year. He wouldn't question it. It would buy us time. I returned to Evie's room and gently woke her. "We need to get dressed quickly, sweetheart," I murmured. "We're going on a little trip." Her eyes flew open. "Because of the bad people?" I hesitated. "What bad people?" "The ones Daddy's afraid of," she said simply, rubbing her eyes. "Are we running away from them?" A chill ran down my spine. "No, honey, just a vacation. Now hurry, okay?" By 7:30, we were in the car and driving, not west to Colorado, as the note suggested, but north, toward my mother's old cottage in rural Vermont, a place thick with ghosts of my past, but also isolated, safe. We stopped 2 towns over for gas. While Evie used the restroom, I kept my head on a swivel, scanning every face. As I was replacing the pump nozzle, a man bumped into me. He was average brown hair, forgettable face, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "Excuse me," he muttered, then, almost under his breath, "Smart move, keep moving." Before I could react, he slid into a blue sedan and drove off. I stood frozen, the gas receipt fluttering in my hand. Back in the car, I checked my phone. A new email had come through, a confirmation from Delta Airlines, a flight from Boston to Miami booked in my name, leaving tomorrow. I hadn't booked any such flight. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" Evie's voice broke through my shock. Yes, sweetie. I forced a smile into the rearview mirror. How about some music? We drove for hours, taking back roads and avoiding highways. Evie stared out the window silently, her little face pressed to the glass as if she was trying to understand the strange new world we'd entered. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting a black SUV to appear, but the road behind us remained empty. Whatever was happening, it had begun, and I didn't know how much time we had before it caught up to us. As we passed an old wooden sign welcoming us into a quiet Vermont town, I finally allowed myself to exhale. We weren't safe, not really, but we were no longer standing still. We were moving, unpredictable. That, for now, was our best defense. I didn't know what I would find in that dusty cottage or how long we could stay hidden, but I knew this much: whatever secrets Jonas was keeping, they were no longer confined to late-night whispers or unspoken suspicions. They were real, and they were hunting us. And I was no longer going to ignore them. Evie had been quiet for most of the drive, but once the road smoothed into a familiar stretch of trees, she turned to me with solemn eyes and asked a question that made my heart clench. Are we never going back? Her voice was small but steady, cutting through the low hum of the tires on the road. I hesitated. Before I could find a soft lie, she continued. Are you and Daddy fighting? Did I do something wrong? Each question felt like a knife, not because of what she asked, but because I had no answers I truly believed. I offered gentle reassurances. No, we're not fighting. No, it's not your fault. Yes, we'll go home soon. But each word felt hollow, like I was trying to patch a dam with tissue paper. The truth was, I didn't fully understand what we were running from. I only knew one thing for certain. Every instinct inside me was screaming that we needed to get away. The cottage came into view just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Nestled by a lake and cradled by tall pine trees, the little house looked more like a memory than a refuge. Small, weather-beaten, and solitary. It had been my mother's before she passed 5 years ago. Jonas had urged me to sell it more than once, citing its isolation and upkeep. But something had always stopped me. Maybe it was sentiment. Maybe it was foresight. Maybe I had subconsciously known that one day I'd need a place like this. Is this where Grandma used to live? Evie asked as I turned into the gravel driveway. Yes, honey, I replied. We're going to stay here for a little while. The moment we stepped inside, a wave of musty air greeted us, stale dust and forgotten summers. I opened the windows to let in the evening breeze as Evie wandered through the modest rooms. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, and a cozy living room anchored by a stone fireplace. It wasn't much, but it would serve its purpose. In a hallway closet, I found boxes I hadn't seen since I packed them up after Mom's funeral. Items I hadn't wanted to keep in our main home but couldn't bring myself to throw away either. On a whim, I reached for one labeled photos and began flipping through the yellowing prints. Near the bottom, a picture caught my eye and stopped my breath. It was Jonas, unmistakably, his arms slung around a woman I didn't recognize. He was smiling, but not the polite, social smile I'd seen him wear in countless pictures. This one was intimate, warm, like he was in love. The timestamp in the corner showed a date just 4 weeks ago. I didn't have long to process it. My phone rang, and Jonas's name lit up the screen. Hello, I answered, trying to keep my tone neutral. Clarissa, he snapped. What the hell is going on? Where are you and Evie? I took a deep breath. Didn't you get my note? We're visiting Beth. I called Beth. She hasn't heard from you. My stomach flipped. You called my sister? Of course I did. I came home to an empty house, a vague note, no one answering their phones. What did you expect me to do? I tried to stay calm. Jonas, I talked to Nicole yesterday. She said she saw you at Riverside Cafe around lunchtime. A pause. That's ridiculous. I was in Montreal. I sent you the hotel confirmation. And I found a photo of you and another woman from last month. Another pause, longer this time. Clarissa, you're being paranoid again. Is that what this is about? Are you having another episode? His words hit like a slap. Casual cruelty wrapped in concern. He knew about my history, how I'd struggled early in our marriage with anxiety and deep-rooted trust issues from my father's endless lies. Jonas had been my anchor then. Now he was using my past against me. I'm not being paranoid, I said quietly. Evie's scared. She said you told her we needed to leave. That's absurd. Put her on the phone. She's resting. His voice softened. Clarissa, whatever you think is happening, you're wrong. Please, come home. We'll figure this out. I'm worried about you. That voice, the one he used when he thought I was spiraling. Once it would have worked, not anymore. I'll think about it, I said flatly. I need to go. I hung up before he could respond. Immediately, a text came through. Nicole. Please call me. I didn't know. You were right. Before I could call her back, there was a knock at the door. I froze. Evie was in the other room, arranging her stuffed animals. I peeked through the front window and felt the blood drain from my face. The blue sedan from the gas station was parked outside. The man from before stood on our porch, hands tucked into his coat pockets, his expression unreadable. Grabbing the fireplace poker, I moved toward the door. Who is it? I called, doing my best to sound braver than I felt. Alec Rains, he replied evenly. I know your husband, and I think you and your daughter are in danger. I slid the chain lock into place and opened the door a few inches, the poker concealed behind me. Alec stood at a distance, his stance non-threatening. How did you find us? I asked. Jonas mentioned this place once, he said, called it your escape hatch. I took a chance. What do you want? To help. He glanced over his shoulder. Can I come in? It's not safe to talk out here. My instincts screamed no, call the police, slam the door. But then I remembered the deleted security footage, the mysterious flight booked in my name, Evie's fear. Wait here. I closed the door, check on Evie, still content with her picture book, then returned. I undid the chain, opened the door and let him inside, poker still in hand. Make it quick, I said, keeping my voice low. My daughter doesn't need more stress. Alec nodded and sat at the kitchen table. Your husband isn't who you think he is, he began without hesitation. Now that you're gone, they'll come after you both. Who's they? The people Jonas actually works for, not Meridian Consulting. That's a front. I gripped the poker tighter. Alec's eyes were steady. He's been running smuggling ops, high-end counterfeit goods. They're hidden inside diplomatic shipments, routed through real ports with fake paperwork. It's lucrative and dangerous. That's insane. Is it? He pulled something from his jacket, a phone, and slid it across the table. On the screen was a document, the K2 folder. My breath caught. It was one of the PDFs I had seen on Jonas's laptop. You're not crazy, Alex said gently. You're finally seeing the truth. I stared at the screen, a weight settling on my chest. The file was identical. Alec hadn't just guessed. It meant he'd accessed the same folder I had, perhaps even before me. That realization chilled me more than anything else. How did you get this? I asked, barely above a whisper. I used to work for them, Alec admitted. Not directly with Jonas, but I saw his name on too many manifests to ignore. I left when things got dark, when they started involving families, and I've been trying to warn people ever since. You're saying he's been using diplomatic channels to smuggle knockoffs? Designer fashion, electronics, jewelry, even rare art, stuff that can pass for the real thing to anyone but an expert. There's big money in it, and even bigger consequences if you get caught. Your husband's not the mastermind, but he's not innocent either. And now that you're gone, they'll worry you know too much. The words circled in my mind like vultures. I wanted to argue, deny it, cling to the life I thought I had, but I couldn't ignore the fear in my daughter's voice, the evidence on the laptop, or the stranger now sitting at my kitchen table with verifiable proof. What do I do? I asked. For now. Alec's voice was firm but kind. Stay put. Don't use credit cards. Don't call anyone else. Let them think you've vanished. I'll check in tomorrow. If I don't show, it means you need to leave. Fast. I nodded, still gripping the poker like it was a lifeline. Alec stood and glanced once more at the window. They don't like loose ends, Clarissa. Protect your daughter, and don't trust anyone who tells you to come home. Then he was gone. I locked the door behind him, heart pounding, and finally let myself sink into one of the kitchen chairs. The poker clattered to the floor beside me. My world had fractured, and I wasn't sure any piece of it could be trusted again. I looked down the hallway toward the room where my daughter slept and realized with piercing clarity, this was only the beginning. This is Jonas's second phone, Alex said quietly, placing a basic, beat-up burner on the table between us. He dropped it at the gas station earlier, right after meeting with a man named Victor. I grabbed it before he realized it was missing. I stared at the small device. It was the exact opposite of the sleek iPhone Jonas always kept on him like a talisman. This was cheap, disposable, anonymous, a phone designed to be forgotten. How do you know this is really his? I asked, not quite ready to believe. Check the messages. I picked it up and unlocked the screen. The texts weren't written in full sentences, just phrases and initials, each one cryptic and unsettling. Codes, transfer numbers, amounts in the tens of thousands. There were photos too, images of shipping containers, customs paperwork, and then, inexplicably, a photo of our house, our actual home, taken from the street at night. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered. "Because Jonas has been using your name to store sensitive materials," Alex said. "If this operation collapses, and it's heading that way, you're the one who'll be liable. You're already tied to shell accounts, signed documents, leases. If the authorities dig deeper, they won't just arrest him. They'll come for you." My stomach twisted. But why? Why would he do that? He needed a clean identity, someone trustworthy on paper, and he knew you wouldn't question it. Alec leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's a missing accountant, guy named Philip Taylor. He handled the finances for several companies Jonas moved money through. The police are investigating. It's only a matter of time before they start following the trail, and it leads right to you." My mind raced. All the little things that hadn't made sense now clicked into place. Jonas's sudden insistence on security cameras, the unexplained cash deposits, the way he never let me see his work phone. Then it hit me. Evie. I turned toward the window, panic rising. She said Jonas told her we needed to leave, that I would understand. He told her. Alec nodded grimly. He's been planning his exit strategy. The real question is, was that strategy ever meant to include you? The room spun. I stood abruptly. I need to make a call. I stepped onto the back porch, pressing Nicole's name on my phone. She picked up on the first ring. "Lacia," she said breathlessly. "Thank God. Are you okay? Is Evie with you?" "We're safe," I said, voice flat. "What did you mean in your text? You were right. What didn't you know?" A long pause followed. Then, "I've been sleeping with Jonas." I gripped the porch railing to keep from collapsing. The world tilted on its axis. "It wasn't serious," she continued in a rush. "It started at the Christmas party. I was drunk, lonely, but I ended it weeks ago, after I found out about the other stuff." "What other stuff?" I asked, voice numb. "He asked me to notarize some documents. They looked like storage rental forms, but the signature, it had your name, but I knew you didn't sign it. When I questioned him, he got angry, said it was just business. Then I overheard him on the phone talking about moving product through customs." I closed my eyes. Images of Jonas's late-night calls and sudden, untraceable business trips surged forward. "Did you know he had another phone?" I asked. "Yes. He always kept one in his car. I assumed it was work." "And you saw him yesterday, at Riverside Cafe?" Nicole sighed. "Yes. He was with a man I didn't recognize. They were arguing, intense." I ended the call after extracting a promise from her not to tell anyone where we were. Back inside, I found Alex sitting exactly where I'd left him. But now, Evie stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him with curiosity and cautious eyes. "Who are you?" she asked. "A friend," Alec replied gently. "I used to work with your dad." Her expression shifted. "Did you come to take us home?" "No, sweetheart," I said, stepping in. "Mr. Raines is just here to help us with something. Why don't you go back to your book for a bit?" She nodded slowly, but then paused. "Is it about the bad thing Daddy did?" My heart clenched. "What bad thing, Evie?" "I heard him talking on his other phone. He said he had to get rid of the problem." She looked down, twisting her hands nervously. "I thought he meant me." I crossed the room and knelt before her. "No, baby, never. Daddy would never hurt you." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure anymore. Once she was settled with a snack and a cartoon on the tablet, I returned to the kitchen. Alec had brewed coffee. He slid a mug across the table toward me. "I've been in contact with a detective," he said. "Max Hellstrom. He's leading the investigation into Philip Taylor's disappearance. Taylor kept the books for several of the companies Jonas used." "You went to the police." My voice rose. "About you. About Jonas and his network. But Hellstrom is smart. If he finds your name on those documents, he'll come knocking." My phone buzzed on the table. Jonas again. I let it ring. Then a text. "You're going to ruin everything. Do you even know what you're running from?" Another call. Unknown number. I picked up, my voice cautious. "Hello?" "Mrs. Wren," the voice on the other end said. It was deep, confident. "This is Detective Max Hellstrom. I need to speak with you about your husband's business activities." "How did you get this number?" "Nicole Hartley gave it to me. She's concerned for your safety." I shot Alec a look. He appeared just as surprised. "Mrs. Wren," the detective continued, "if you don't cooperate, you could be arrested as a co-conspirator. We have documents bearing your name." "Forgeries," I said automatically. "That may be. But we need to verify them, in person. Where are you?" I ended the call without replying. My hands were trembling. "We need to go," I told Alec. "Wait," he said. "Think. If Hellstrom's reaching out, he might already have enough to charge Jonas. If you vanish now, it looks like guilt." "I don't care," I said. "I need to keep my daughter safe." Alec studied me, then nodded. "There might be another way," he said. "One that clears your name and makes sure Jonas can never hurt either of you again." He stood, pacing slowly, as if weighing what to say next. "Hellstrom is after Jonas, not you, but unless you cooperate, you'll be caught in a crossfire. What you need is leverage, evidence, that proves Jonas manipulated you, used you as a shield." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, still clutching the coffee mug like it could anchor me. Alec turned to me. "If we can find the original versions of those documents, unsigned, unaltered, we can show that your signature was forged. And if we can locate the storage unit where Jonas is hiding his physical records, we may be able to expose everything." I nodded slowly. "You think the unit is under my name?" "Most likely. He used your ID to rent it. But there will be surveillance footage, security access logs, things that show he was the one going in and out. We just need to get to it before he does." I glanced toward the hallway, where Evie's quiet laughter floated in from the other room. Every part of me screamed to scoop her up and disappear into the mountains, live off the grid, never look back. But I couldn't, not if I ever wanted to give her a life without fear. "Tell me where to start," I said finally. Alec gave a tight nod. "There's a storage complex 2 towns over. I believe that's where he's been keeping his physical files, maybe even hard drives. We'll go at first light. And if he gets there first..." Alec's jaw tensed. "Then we'll know just how far he's willing to go." The air felt heavier now, like the very walls of the cottage had leaned in to listen. I finished my coffee and stood. That night I barely slept. Every time a branch cracked outside or the heater ticked, I jolted upright, heart pounding. I kept the burner phone next to me, screen dark, messages unread. At dawn, Alec was already at the table, a map spread out between us. We were no longer hiding, we were planning. For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear. I felt resolve. "I'm listening," I told Alec, my voice barely steady. "You mentioned a crawl space. Check it before we decide anything." The crawl space access was tucked behind a row of coats in the front closet, a square wooden panel I'd barely glanced at since inheriting the cottage. With a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and a nervous flutter in my chest, I pulled the panel open and ducked inside. The air beneath the cottage was thick with dust and the scent of damp earth. Cobwebs clung to my face and hair as I crawled forward, brushing them away with one hand while clutching the light with the other. In the farthest corner, wedged behind an old steamer trunk, something metallic glinted. I reached out and pulled it free, a heavy, rust-speckled box, locked tight but not particularly secure. A twist of the latch opened it. Inside, carefully packed, were bundles of cash, dozens of them. Stacks of $100 bills held together with rubber bands. Beneath the money were 2 passports. I opened the first. My face stared back at me, but the name was unfamiliar. The second passport showed Evie's photo, also under an alias. Both looked freshly printed, high quality. Tucked between the documents was a folded sheet of paper. Unfolding it revealed a list of international addresses, all cities I didn't recognize but assumed were far from Vermont. Far from anywhere Jonas had told me about. The question wasn't just where he planned to go, it was whether he had ever intended for us to go with him, or had we become, as Evie once overheard him say, the problem he needed to eliminate. I climbed out slowly, box in hand, my limbs shaking more from adrenaline than exhaustion. Back in the kitchen, I spread the contents on the table. Alec examined the passports, his face tightening as he held them up to the light. "These were professional grade," he said, "not something you get from a guy with a printer in his garage." He was serious about disappearing. "So he was planning to run," I murmured, the weight of that truth settling like ice in my chest. "Yes," Alec said softly, "and now you have a choice." I looked down at the foreign names on our faces, the addresses, the money. This wasn't some spontaneous escape plan. It was detailed, deliberate. My life, our life, was nothing more than one part of a carefully managed operation, a front. The man I had loved, the man I had built a home and family with, had never really existed. "Call Detective Hallstrom," I said finally, my voice resolute. "Tell him I'm ready to..." Detective Max Hallstrom didn't fit the picture I had built in my mind. No trench coat, no 5 o'clock shadow, no weary cynicism. He wore a crisp, tucked-in button-down and khakis, with neatly combed salt and pepper hair and a calm, focused demeanor. Only the deep-set lines around his eyes betrayed a career spent navigating lies and danger. We met at a quiet roadside diner about 30 minutes from the cottage. Alec had insisted on a neutral public location. Evie sat at a corner booth with chocolate milk and a stack of crayons, distracted but close enough that I could keep her in sight. Alec stayed behind to keep watch at the cottage. "Mrs. Wren," Hallstrom said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." "I'm here because I want answers," I replied, my hands wrapped tightly around a lukewarm mug of diner coffee, "and because I need to protect my daughter." Hallstrom nodded, glancing briefly in Evie's direction. "I understand, and for what it's worth, I believe you, but we still need to prove your innocence." I reached into my bag and slid the metal box across the table. Inside, on top of the cash, were the passports and the note of addresses. "I found these in the crawl space under our cottage. There's more files on Jonas's laptop, a burner phone full of messages about product shipments and bank transfers." He flipped through the contents methodically, his face unreadable. "When did you first start to suspect him?" So I told him everything. The watch Jonas forgot, Nicole's strange sighting, the deleted surveillance footage, Evie's whispered warnings in the dark. With each word, the dam holding back my denial crumbled. The man I had trusted, the man who had held my hand in the delivery room and whispered our daughter's name with reverence, was also the man who forged my signature and stored his smuggling operation in my name. Hallstrom exhaled slowly. "It's more extensive than we thought," he said. "Your husband is part of a sophisticated network trafficking in counterfeit luxury goods, designer bags, jewelry, watches, even high-end electronics. They're shipped inside legitimate containers, buried among real items. Over the past 3 years, they've moved millions." "And Philip Taylor?" I asked. "He's the accountant who handled their books. Disappeared 4 days ago. His wife filed the report. We found evidence he'd been skimming off the top. The last person seen with him was your husband." I swallowed the bile that rose in my throat. "You think Jonas killed him?" Hallstrom didn't flinch. "We don't know, but if Jonas realized Taylor was a liability, it could explain why he was accelerating his escape plans." I glanced toward Evie, who was carefully coloring a cartoon fox. So innocent, so unaware. "What happens now?" "Now," Hallstrom said, lowering his voice, "we need to set a trap. And you're the bait." His plan was terrifyingly simple. I would call Jonas, act panicked and confused, ask him to explain himself. All the while, agents would trace the call, recording everything in hopes that he'd incriminate himself. If he suspects we're listening, he'll run, Hallstrom agreed, and possibly disappear forever. "I can't do it from the cottage," I said. "He might already know we've been there." "We've secured a hotel room in Burlington," Hallstrom replied. "It's monitored and protected. You and your daughter will be safe." "And Alec?" I asked. "Where does he fit into all this?" Hallstrom's jaw tightened. "Mr. Raines has been working with us for a while. After he realized what Jonas was really involved in, he came to us. He's been helping quietly behind the scenes." "Can I trust him?" "As much as you can trust anyone right now." Not comforting, but it was all I had. We finished our meeting, and I texted Alec our new location. His reply came within seconds. "Be careful, I'll meet you there tonight." The Burlington Hotel was bland and sterile, the kind of place where businessmen checked in and no one remembered their names, but its anonymity was comforting. Evie wandered the room, poking at the lamp switches and testing the bounce of the bed. I sat at the edge, staring at my phone, heart pounding. "You don't have to do this today," Hallstrom said from the window. "We can wait." "No," I said. "I need to hear it from him." I dialed Jonas's number, my fingers trembling. He answered on the second ring. "Clarissa," he said, "where are you? Are you okay?" His voice, so warm, so familiar, nearly undid me. For a fleeting second, hearing Jonas's voice, I almost let myself believe that we were still the same couple who'd once danced barefoot in our kitchen, who whispered secrets in the dark, that this entire nightmare was just some bizarre misunderstanding, some twisted tangle that could be unraveled with a few honest words. "I'm scared, Jonas," I said, and it wasn't a lie. I let the tremor in my voice spill through the phone. "I don't know what's going on. Please, please, just tell me the truth." There was a pause. "Where's Evie?" he asked, his tone careful, measured. "She's with me. She's okay." Another breath. Then I pushed forward. "I found the passports, the cash. I know about the second phone." This time, the silence dragged longer. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted, and gone was the concern, replaced by a cold edge. "You've been going through my things." I had to. Nothing was making sense. My grip tightened on the phone. "Who are you, Jonas? Really?" I'm still the man you married, he said, his tone weary now, like he was carrying the weight of some enormous burden, just with a job that's more complicated than you ever knew. Smuggling isn't a job, I snapped. It's a crime. He laughed, not joyfully, bitterly. You think it's that simple? Black and white? The world runs on gray areas, Clarissa. It always has. And Philip Taylor, is he one of your gray areas too? The silence on the other end was sharper than any shout. I saw Hallstrom across the room give me a nod. Keep going, it said. You're doing good. I don't know what you're talking about, Jonas finally said, each word crisp and detached. The accountant, I pressed. The one who went missing, the last person he was seen with was you. Who's been filling your head with this garbage? Jonas's voice rose, laced with irritation. Nicole? That so-called friend of yours, or maybe it's Alec Raines. Has he found you yet? My stomach dropped. I tried not to show it, but Hallstrom's eyes narrowed. How did Jonas know Alec was involved? How do you know about Alec? I asked. Because he's been trying to take me down for months, Jonas said. He's using you, Clarissa, using our family, just like he used my name to lease those storage units, across multiple states. I didn't even know about them until it was too late. He paused. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. I was protecting you, he said softly, keeping you clean, in case things fell apart. Well, Jonas, I said, my voice ice now. They've fallen apart. The police know. The investigation's already started. They know about the counterfeits. What have you told them? He asked, dangerously calm. Nothing. Not yet. But I will, unless you start explaining. For the next 20 minutes, he did. He talked about how he'd been pulled in by a former client, how easy it was to hide counterfeit luxury goods, handbags, watches, electronics, inside legitimate freight. How, at first, it felt harmless, victimless, just big companies losing pennies out of their billions. He never mentioned Philip Taylor. He never explained the fake passports. He didn't say why Evie had been afraid. Come home, he said at last, his voice softening. We can figure this out together. I have money set aside. We'll disappear. New identities, new lives. It'll be an adventure. And the most terrifying part, he meant it. I could hear the thrill in his voice. I found the key, I said, voice steady. Silence. What key? He asked, suddenly cautious. You know exactly what key, and what it opens. Another pause. Longer. Where are you, Clarissa? Let me come to you. We need to talk, face to face. Hallstrom shook his head furiously, mouthing, Don't tell him. I need time, I said. I'll call you tomorrow. I ended the call before he could respond. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. You did well, Hallstrom said, stepping closer. We got enough. We'll get warrants for the storage units. But I barely heard him. He knows about Alec, I whispered. That's not possible unless someone told him, Hallstrom said grimly. We may have a leak. That night, after Evie fell asleep tucked against the side of the hotel bed, I stood by the window watching headlights roll across the parking lot. Alec had texted that he'd be late, told me not to worry. But I did. If Jonas knew Alec was involved, was anyone truly safe? My phone chimed. An email, no subject line, it was from Jonas. I opened it. A single sentence. See for yourself. Attached was an address. Not our house, not the cottage. Somewhere else. Another town, about 30 minutes away. Another chime. A second email. A photo. Me and Evie at the park, from last summer. But not a photo Jonas could have taken. The angle was wrong, the distance was too far. We hadn't known we were being watched. More photos followed. Eve at school. Me at the grocery store. Us getting into the car in front of Nicole's house. Surveillance, meticulously taken, documenting every movement. The last email had 4 words, I was protecting you. From what? From who? As I stood frozen by the window, the blue sedan finally pulled into the lot. Alec, relief washed through me, then suspicion. Could I even trust him? My phone rang. Nicole. Have you heard from Alec? I asked, my heart racing. No, but Clarissa, I've been going through some of Jonas's papers, stuff he left at my place, probably by accident. There's something you need to know. What is it? It's about your father's company. I blinked. My father's company? It went bankrupt years ago, Jonas told me. That's what he wanted you to believe, Nicole said. But according to these records, Jonas was involved in the takeover. He worked with the buyers. I couldn't breathe. You're saying he orchestrated it? Yes, she said quietly. Before you even met him. My pulse thundered in my ears as the revelation sank in. My entire relationship with Jonas might have been built on a foundation of calculated deceit. If he was involved with the hostile takeover of my father's company, if he had profited from our loss, it meant he had targeted me, not just loved me, not just married me, but strategically inserted himself into my life for a purpose. The pain was swift, cutting deeper than I expected. I asked Nicole, my voice barely a whisper. Why would he do that? I don't know, she said, but these documents have his signature, meetings dated months before your father lost the company. He was part of the negotiation team for the buyers. He knew exactly who I was, I murmured. He did, she confirmed. The room felt like it was spinning. All those years, birthdays, anniversaries, the night Evie was born. They weren't memories of a real love story. They were part of an elaborate con. Hallstrom sat down across from me again, his expression grave. This changes everything, he said. We're not just talking about smuggling anymore. This is premeditated fraud, identity manipulation, possibly even conspiracy to defraud. And possibly murder, I added, if Philip Taylor really is dead. We'll find out, he promised. We'll get to the bottom of this. I nodded slowly. Then let's go to that address Jonas sent. I want to see what he's hiding. Nicole's words echoed in my mind like the crash of distant thunder. He targeted you. Your entire relationship was, what, a business strategy? She had paused, uncertain, before adding, I don't know for sure. But from what I'm seeing, Clarissa, it doesn't look good. As I stood by the hotel window, watching Alec cross the parking lot toward the entrance, a sick feeling settled deep in my stomach. Everything I thought I knew was unraveling. The mosaic of my life with Jonas, our wedding, Evie's birth, years of shared moments was rearranging itself into something sinister. A picture I didn't want to see. A picture that now included Alec. I have to go, I said abruptly into the phone. Don't tell anyone we spoke. Nicole's worried reply was cut off as I hung up and turned to Hallstrom, who had been dozing in the armchair by the door. I shook him awake. We need to move, I said urgently, now. He blinked at me, groggy but alert. What's happened? Alec is here, I said, glancing toward the hallway, and I think he might be working with Jonas. We didn't have time for a discussion. Hallstrom didn't question me. He grabbed his coat and motioned for me to get Evie, who was still curled up in bed. I wrapped her in a blanket and scooped her into my arms, whispering that we were going on another adventure. The service elevator smelled like cleaning chemicals and something stale, cigarettes maybe, or old mildew. The hum of the machinery filled the silence as we descended to the hotel's basement level. Evie, still half asleep, clung to my hand with a trust that broke my heart. "You're sure about this?" Hallstrom asked again, his hand never straying far from the weapon at his hip. "The photos Jonas sent," I said. "They weren't just random surveillance. They were methodical, professional. He said he'd been tracking me since the day we met. Who else could have taken those pictures?" "It could be anyone in Jonas's organization," Hallstrom replied. "His partners, his enemies." "But Alec found us at the cottage," I insisted. "He said he used to work with Jonas, then claimed he turned on him. But what if that was the lie? What if Alec's been working with Jonas, or worse, with the people Jonas is afraid of, this whole time?" The elevator doors opened to reveal a dim, utilitarian corridor. Yellowed tiles, flickering fluorescent lights. Hallstrom led us through a series of maintenance hallways until we reached a side exit that opened onto the hotel's rear parking area. "My car's just around the corner," he said. "Stay close." The night air was brisk, slicing through the warmth of the hotel. Eve was awake now, wide-eyed but silent. No tears, just watchfulness. My brave little girl had seen too much already. We made it to Hallstrom's unmarked sedan without incident. He unlocked the doors and was just reaching for the handle when a figure stepped into the pool of light cast by a nearby lamp. "Clarissa." Jonas. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His dark jeans and gray pullover were the same clothes he'd worn the morning he left for Montreal. His hair was unkempt, his jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked like a man unraveling. Hallstrom reacted instantly, drawing his gun in one smooth motion. "Don't move," he barked. Jonas stopped, raised his hands. "I'm not armed. I just need to talk to my wife." I stepped in front of Evie, my heart pounding. "How did you find us?" "The same way I knew about Alec," Jonas said, his eyes locked on mine. "I've been tracking her phone since the day we met." I froze. The casualness of the admission was more terrifying than any threat. "It was for your protection," he said, like that made it okay. "You never knew the kind of people your father was involved with, the enemies he made." My father was a failed businessman, I said flatly. He drank himself to death. Your father, Jonas countered, was laundering money for the Kane family. When he tried to skim off the top, they came after him. The bankruptcy, the drinking, it was all aftermath. Hallstrom didn't lower his weapon. That's a fascinating story, Mr. Wren, but it doesn't explain the counterfeits, or the missing accountant. I needed resources, Jonas said simply. Protection costs money. I stared at him. Are you telling me our marriage, our life together was a cover, a witness protection scam? It didn't start that way, he said, looking genuinely pained. I was hired to keep an eye on you, yes. The Kanes thought you might have access to information your father left behind. But then I met you, and you fell in love, I said bitterly. How convenient. It's the truth, he insisted. Ask Evie, why do you think I warned her, told her to get you out of the house? I looked down at my daughter, who was staring at her father with a mixture of curiosity and fear. You told Evie we needed to leave, I asked. Jonas nodded. I saw Victor Kane in town. I knew they'd found us. I couldn't risk coming home, not with them watching me. But I called Evie, told her to tell you to run. Daddy said the bad men were coming, Evie said softly. He said we had to go. Hallstrom's stance didn't change. And the accountant, Philip Taylor? He's in a safe house in New Hampshire, Jonas said. He came to me for help. The Kanes were blackmailing him. He kept records, everything, bank transfers, threats, even recordings. I moved him before they could silence him. Jonas looked at me. The storage unit, the address I sent, it has the evidence, everything you need to prove I wasn't the enemy. Hallstrom finally lowered his weapon a fraction. And Alec Raines, where does he fit into this? Jonas's expression turned cold. Raines works for the Kanes. He always has. He's been playing both sides, pretending to help you while feeding them information. If he's found you, Clarissa, you're already in danger. As if summoned by his name, headlights swept across the parking lot. A blue sedan pulled up slowly, stopping about 20 yards away. Alex stepped out. Well, isn't this a touching reunion, he called, his voice echoing in the still night air. Sorry I'm late to the party. Hallstrom's gun came up again, this time aimed at Alex. Alex's smile didn't reach his eyes. Come on, Hallstrom. You really going to believe the man who's been living a lie for nearly a decade? The man who built his whole life on deception? Hallstrom kept his stance steady. Drop your weapon, Alec. Hands where I can see them. Alec's hands slowly rose. I don't have a weapon, Max. I came to talk, just like Jonas. Let's not do anything rash. I've heard enough talking, Hallstrom growled. Then listen to this, Alex said, taking a slow step forward. Jonas is lying to you. He's been using Clarissa as a shield, hiding behind his family while he builds a counterfeit empire. He's the one who disappeared Taylor. He's the one who dragged her into this. I looked from one man to the other, my world tilting beneath me. You're both saying the other is the traitor. How do I know who to trust? Jonas's voice was calm, almost pleading. Because I told you the truth when it mattered. Because I warned our daughter. Alex's eyes narrowed. And because I didn't tell you about the surveillance photos, think, Clarissa, who had the motive to watch you? My breath caught. The emails, the photos taken from across streets, through crowds. Someone had been watching us long before we knew we were in danger. Someone close, too close. Clarissa, Jonas said, stepping closer. You have to choose right now. I didn't move. I couldn't. You don't have to decide alone, Hallstrom said. We're going to take them both in. The sound of sirens in the distance shattered the standoff. Red and blue lights flickered between the trees at the edge of the lot. Move, Hallstrom shouted. Everything happened in a blur. Jonas dropped to his knees, hands behind his head. Alec turned to run, but two agents cut him off, tackling him to the ground. Evie buried her face in my shoulder as I held her tight, shielding her from the chaos. Minutes later, both men were cuffed and read their rights. Jonas didn't resist. Alec cursed and spat, shouting that he'd been set up. Hallstrom stood by, grim but steady, as backup agents took over the scene. It was over. Or at least, the worst of it was. Back in the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my sleeping daughter. Hallstrom stood nearby, watching me with something like sympathy in his eyes. You did well, he said. You kept her safe. You held it together. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow. What happens now? I asked. We sort through the evidence, he said. The storage unit, the recordings, the financial trails. We'll build the case. We'll figure out exactly who Jonas was protecting you from. And if it wasn't the Kanes? I asked. Hallstrom hesitated. Then we'll find out who it was. I promise you that. Alex's mocking voice cut through the tension like a blade. He raised his hands mockingly, as if in surrender, his laugh dry and echoing in the quiet lot. "You know, Jonas," he sneered, "you really should have just taken the cash and walked away. Victor was willing to let bygones be bygones, but no, you had to play the hero." I felt Jonas tense beside me. His hand reached out, steady but urgent, and he whispered, "Get in the car, Clarissa, take Evie and go, now." Before I could move, Alex's voice rang out again, louder, crueler. "No one's going anywhere." He now held a gun, its barrel glinting beneath the dull overhead light. "Victor wants to have a word with all of you, especially little Evie. Seems she's been hearing more than she should." That was the breaking point. The moment he mentioned my daughter's name, something primal surged through me. Without thinking, I reached into my coat pocket and yanked out the flare gun I had taken from the cottage's emergency kit. It was never meant to be a weapon, just a precaution, but in that moment it was the only defense I had. I aimed it skyward and pulled the trigger. The flare burst from the barrel with a shriek, rocketing into the air and exploding into a brilliant red bloom that painted the night in stark, artificial daylight. The shock bought us a precious second, just long enough for Hallstrom to spring into action. He launched himself at Alec, driving him backward in a flurry of fists and falling bodies. "Go," Jonas shouted. He grabbed my arm, pulling both me and Evie toward Hallstrom's unmarked sedan. "The storage unit," Jonas panted as we ran. "Everything's there. The evidence, the money, the files, get it. Get it to the police." "Come with us," I urged, panic blooming in my chest. Jonas hesitated. "I can't. I'll only lead them to you, and someone has to make sure Alec doesn't slip away again." His eyes met mine, and for the first time in days I saw something real there. Regret, duty, love. Whatever his crimes, Jonas had made a choice in that moment, one that would either redeem him or damn him. He turned back toward the chaos just as I slammed the car door shut behind Evie and jammed the keys into the ignition. Hallstrom's keys, the ones he'd dropped during the scuffle. I peeled out of the lot just as the first wail of sirens pierced the air, local cops finally responding to the flare. And behind them a second set of headlights, larger, faster, more menacing. We were being followed. "Hang on, sweetheart," I told Evie, whose tiny hands clutched her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. "This is going to be a wild ride." I drove like a woman possessed, twisting and weaving through the slumbering streets of the small town. I took turns at random, hoping to confuse whoever was behind us. The address Jonas had texted me echoed in my mind like a mantra. Just 10 more minutes, I thought. 10 minutes and we'd be at the storage facility. "Mommy," Evie said suddenly, her voice quiet but clear, "I know a shortcut." "What?" "And Daddy took me for ice cream here. He used a road by the train tracks." My heart clenched at the thought of that other version of our life, the one I now saw through cracked glass. But this moment wasn't about grief, it was about survival. I followed Evie's directions without question, turning onto a narrow service road that skirted the railroad line. For a moment the headlights behind us vanished. When they reappeared they were more distant. Evie's shortcut had worked. The storage facility appeared ahead like a fortress of corrugated metal and chain-link fencing. I entered the gate code Jonas had given me and slipped through the opening gate, parking between 2 long rows of storage units. "Stay in the car," I told Evie, putting as much authority into my voice as I could muster. "Lock the doors. If anyone tries to open them, anyone but me, use my phone, call the police." She nodded, solemn and silent. My brave girl. Unit 217 was at the far end. I sprinted toward it, the key Jonas had hidden in his desk clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, the roar of another engine reached my ears. Our pursuer had caught up. I shoved the key into the lock, twisted, and rolled the door open with a rattling crash that echoed through the complex. A single bare bulb flickered to life, casting stark shadows over the interior. Boxes, papers, folders. It looked like an office had been transplanted into a metal coffin. I grabbed the nearest box and flipped the lid. Documents tumbled out, shipping manifests, customs declarations, contracts, all of it implicating powerful people I recognized from the news. Politicians, executives, kingpins, all connected to Victor Kane. A large metal safe stood in the back of the unit. Its door was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently accessed it. Inside, bricks of cash, a laptop, and a USB stick labeled insurance. Footsteps outside. I shoved the USB into my pocket, scanned for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand landed on a heavy flashlight, just as a figure darkened the doorway. "Clarissa." It was Nicole. Hair wild, eyes wide, breath ragged. "I followed you from the hotel. Are you okay? Where's Evie?" She's in the car, I said, surprised but relieved. We need to get this to the... Jonas is fine, Nicole interrupted. Hallstrom's got Alec. It's over. Something in her tone froze the blood in my veins. How do you know that, and how did you find us? Nicole's face changed, hardened, cold. You're not the only one Jonas trusted, she said. Then she pulled a gun from her coat pocket. I'm sorry, Clarissa, but Victor can't let this evidence get out. The world tilted, understanding hit like a slap. You're working for the Canes. She shrugged. Everyone works for someone. Jonas forgot that, especially when we were sleeping together. My fingers tightened around the flashlight. Even then, I said, stalling. Nicole smirked. Especially then. She raised the gun. Hand me the USB. It's in the safe, I lied. As she turned slightly, I lunged, swinging the flashlight with all my might. It connected with her wrist. The gun clattered to the ground. We scrambled, paper flying, boxes crashing. Nicole was stronger than she looked, but I was fighting for my daughter. I kicked the gun away, drove my shoulder into her, and she slammed into a metal shelf with a grunt. I didn't stop. I couldn't. And just when I thought I'd lost the upper hand, a voice echoed from the doorway. Step away from her, Nicole. Jonas. Bruised and breathless, he held Alec's gun in one shaking hand. Nicole froze. And I finally exhaled. Nicole's eyes flicked between Jonas and the discarded gun, calculating. But Jonas stepped fully into the unit, his stance unwavering. It's over, Nicole. The police are already on their way. Do you really want to add attempted murder to your rap sheet? You don't get it, she hissed. Victor doesn't forgive. If I don't finish this, I'm as good as dead. You already are, Jonas said, his voice low and final. Behind him, the sound of tires crunching gravel signaled approaching vehicles. Red and blue lights began to dance along the metal walls of the storage unit. Nicole's shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of her. Clarissa, Jonas said without looking at me, get Evie. It's time to end this. I ran to the car. Evie's face lit up when she saw me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Is it over? Almost, I said, wrapping her in my arms. Almost. Minutes later, uniformed officers swarmed the storage unit. Nicole was taken into custody without resistance. Jonas handed over the USB drive and the files. And finally, after days of terror and doubt, the truth began to unravel under the harsh lights of justice. But even as they led Jonas away in handcuffs, protective custody, Hallstrom assured me, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a long road to recovery. For me, for Evie, for all the pieces of a life built on a lie, now scattered and waiting to be rebuilt. Yet for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had chosen to face the truth. And that choice, terrifying though it was, had set us free. Fueled by pure maternal instinct, I summoned a strength I didn't know I possessed. With a desperate, adrenaline-laced shove, I hurled Nicole backward into a rickety shelving unit. Time seemed to stall for a heartbeat as the metal frame teetered, then collapsed with a deafening crash. The sound echoed off the concrete walls as the shelves slammed down, trapping her beneath a tangle of steel and scattered contents. Her startled cry turned to rage, but I didn't wait to see if she'd recover. I grabbed the gun, my fingers barely steady, and stumbled backward out of the unit. Slamming the metal door shut, I found a rusted padlock on the neighboring wall and snapped it into place, sealing Nicole inside. Her furious, muffled screams followed me as I bolted down the row of storage units, my heart pounding in my throat. Evie was exactly where I had left her, still huddled in the front seat, clutching the cell phone like a lifeline, her small face pale but calm. Mommy, she said as I threw open the car door. I called 911 like you said. They're coming. Tears streamed down my face as I pulled her into my arms, her body warm and real against mine. You did perfectly, sweetheart, I whispered. Absolutely perfectly. Sirens began to pierce the night, growing louder with each second. I held Evie tight, the weight of the USB drive in my pocket grounding me in the moment. That small device, the size of a house key, held the evidence that would finally unravel the web of lies we'd been trapped in. It was the key to our freedom. 3 months later, I stepped out of the courthouse into crisp October sunlight. The courthouse steps felt unyielding beneath my feet, but I stood tall. After endless hours of depositions, interrogations, and courtroom revelations, it was finally done. My testimony had helped secure Jonas a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperating with federal agents. Nicole had been charged with conspiracy and attempted murder, her betrayal officially recognized in the eyes of the law, and me, I was officially cleared of any wrongdoing. Detective Hallstrom, the man who'd guided me through the storm, stood at the base of the steps. He looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, his coat unbuttoned, his posture easier. "Mrs. Wren?" he greeted. "It's Miss Walker now," I corrected gently, having reclaimed my maiden name the moment the divorce papers were finalized. "How are you?" he asked. "Better than expected." He fell into step beside me as we walked toward the parking lot. "The Kane investigation has expanded to 3 states. Your ex-husband's testimony has been invaluable." "And Philip Taylor?" I asked. "In protective custody for now. Once the trials wrap, he'll get a new name and a clean start. Speaking of which, what about you and Evie?" I smiled, for the first time in a long while, genuinely. "We're moving. Sold the house, sold the cottage. Too many memories." "To where?" he asked. "That's our secret," I said softly. After everything we'd endured, privacy felt sacred. Hallstrom nodded, understanding. "Take care of yourself, Miss Walker, and that remarkable daughter of yours." "I intend to." I passed by Nicole's former home later that day. The for sale sign had already been replaced with a bright, hopeful, sold. A new family would move in, unaware of the secrets the neighborhood once harbored. That was the way of suburbia, its manicured lawns covering everything beneath. I drove to what had once been our dream home. It stood empty now, filled only with the echo of old dreams and abandoned hopes. Evie was at her new school, where no one knew our story, no whispers in the hallways, just a clean slate. Most of our belongings had been packed and sent to storage. What remained were the relics I couldn't bring myself to discard. Jonas's clothes, our wedding album, the Omega watch he'd forgotten that morning, the small oversight that had set everything in motion. I placed the watch gently in a box with the rest of his remaining items. No note, no goodbye. His lawyer would collect it soon. My phone rang, the temporary number I used now. Few people had it. "Hello." "Clarissa." The voice was hollow, distant. Prison lines always sounded like ghosts on the line. "Oh, Jonas. I heard today was the final hearing." "It was," I replied, sitting cross-legged on the bare living room floor. 5 years, he said. "Could have been worse." Silence stretched between us. So much unsaid, so many truths now irrelevant. "How's Evie?" he asked finally. "She's strong," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She's healing." "She gets that from you." "Why are you calling, Jonas?" Another pause. "They took everything when they processed me, but I noticed, the watch you gave me, it's gone." "I have it," I said. "You left it behind." "Keep it. Sell it, whatever." "I'm giving it to your lawyer." His voice was tired now. "Clarissa, I know you won't believe me, but not all of it was a lie." "I know." And I did. Somewhere between the betrayal and the chaos there had been something real, but that didn't make it enough. "Goodbye, Jonas." Later that afternoon, I picked up Evie from school. She ran into my arms, her little backpack bouncing behind her. "Mommy, I got a gold star on my drawing." I knelt and hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and school crayons. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." She pulled out a slightly wrinkled paper. "It's us," she said, pointing. "You, me, and the puppy we're going to get at our new house." That night, as I tucked Evie into bed at our temporary rental, she looked up at me with those wide, curious eyes. "Mommy, are we safe now?" I brushed her hair back gently, my fingers trembling just slightly. "We are," I said, "because we told the truth, and we stuck together." She nodded solemnly, even when it was scary. "Especially then," I whispered, kissing her forehead. Later, when the house was quiet and Evie's soft breathing filled the space between shadows, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. Outside the window, a thin crescent moon hung over the trees, fragile and glowing. I thought about everything we'd survived, not just the danger but the lies, the betrayal, the destruction of a life I had once believed was perfect. But what Jonas and his secrets hadn't destroyed was our will to rebuild. I opened my laptop and began typing, not evidence this time, not statements or affidavits, but a journal, a record, our story, not just for me but for Evie one day, when she would want to understand. And when she read it, she'd know that even in the darkest moments there is light to be found if you keep walking, keep fighting, and never stop protecting the ones you love. We weren't just survivors. We were starting over. Together. Nicole was fast, but I had something stronger on my side. Desperation, the kind only a mother protecting her child can know. As she lunged for the gun, I pivoted, using all my strength to shove her backward. Her body slammed into the metal shelving unit lining the storage wall. For a heart-stopping moment, it wobbled on its base, teetering under the sudden force. Then with a groaning screech it crashed down, burying her in a cascade of boxes, binders, and broken metal. Nicole's scream cut off as she hit the concrete, the weight of the shelf pinning her beneath. Dust billowed in the air. I didn't wait to see if she could wriggle free. I scrambled to where the pistol had clattered, snatched it up, then bolted out of the unit. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I yanked the metal door down and slammed it shut with a metallic bang. A padlock, conveniently forgotten on a nearby latch, clicked into place with a satisfying snap. Nicole's muffled protest filtered through the metal as I backed away, adrenaline surging through my veins. I sprinted toward the car. Every muscle in my body screamed from adrenaline and panic. Evie was right where I had left her, buckled in, phone clutched tightly in her hands like a lifeline. Her eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed. "Mommy," she said breathlessly. "I called 911, like you said, they're coming." Tears broke loose as I pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You did so good, baby, so good, just hold on a little longer." The first wail of sirens crested over the sound of the ocean wind. Help was on the way. 3 months passed like a storm front. Depositions, interviews, courtrooms, and testimony blurred together in an exhausting montage of justice and reckoning. Finally, on a crisp October morning, I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun warming my skin, as if reminding me that life, real life, still existed outside the maze of betrayal and lies. Jonas had accepted a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison, with the potential for parole in exchange for full cooperation. His information helped dismantle large portions of Victor Kane's smuggling network. Nicole faced multiple charges: conspiracy, attempted murder, obstruction. She hadn't gone down quietly, but justice had spoken. Detective Hallstrom stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, no longer the rumpled investigator I had first met. A promotion had taken him to a federal task force, and he wore it well. "Miss Walker," he said, greeting me with a nod. "I'd taken back my maiden name the day the divorce was finalized." "How are you holding up?" he asked. I smiled, not the brittle smile I'd practiced for months, but something real. "Better than I expected." He walked beside me toward the parking lot. "Jonas's testimony is still opening doors. The investigation has spread across 3 states. And Philip Taylor? Still in witness protection. Once all this is over, he'll get a new life, just like you and Evie." I nodded. "That's the plan." Hallstrom paused before saying goodbye. "Take care of yourself and that daughter of yours. She's remarkable." "She gets it from her grandmother," I replied. Later that afternoon, I drove past Nicole's old house. A new family had moved in, a swing set in the yard, a child's bicycle on the driveway. Just another peaceful suburb hiding the ghosts of past dramas. I glanced at the for sale sign on what used to be our home, our dream house. It had been emptied and cleaned, ready for new memories. I didn't go inside. Some places didn't deserve goodbyes. My phone rang. The number was familiar, a prison line. Jonas. His voice was grainy, far away. I heard today was the final hearing. It was Issa. I sat on the porch of our temporary rental, watching the tide roll in. 5 years. "Could have been worse," he said, not sounding convinced. "How's Evie?" he asked after a pause. "She's okay, better than okay. She's moving on." "Like her mom," he said. Silence stretched across the line. Then, "Clarissa, I know you won't believe this, but not everything was a lie." I didn't respond. There were no words left to bridge the canyon he had carved between us. "Goodbye, Jonas," I said quietly and ended the call. A week later, I stood with Evie on the porch of our new home, a pale blue cottage nestled near the rocky coast, where the air smelled of sea salt and something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The movers unloaded the last boxes while Evie danced barefoot on the wooden porch, arms outstretched to the wind like a gull learning to fly. "Is this it, Mommy?" she asked. "Is this our real forever house?" I knelt to her level, brushing hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart, this is where we start over." As we unpacked, I discovered a package on the doorstep. No return address, only my name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was Jonas's watch, and a note written in tight, deliberate script. "Some things are worth keeping. Stay ready just in case." Alec Rains. His name wasn't there, but I knew he had vanished after the arrest, slipping out of the system like a ghost. That he had found us again was troubling. He left no threats, only a warning. Was something more complicated. I locked the watch in a drawer, closed but not forgotten. That evening, Evie and I walked down to the beach, the sky glowing with the rich colors of dusk. Waves lapped at the sand, and gulls wheeled overhead. I watched my daughter run toward the surf, her laughter carried away by the sea breeze. "Mommy, look," she shouted, pointing at a golden retriever bounding toward us across the sand. A woman jogged behind him, waving. "Sorry, he's friendly." "What's his name?" Evie asked, kneeling as the dog licked her face. The woman replied. Evie looked at me, triumphant. "I told you." That night, I tucked her into bed in her new room, painted soft lavender with seashells on the windowsill. "Are you happy here, Mommy?" she asked, her voice a drowsy whisper. I kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, I really am." As she drifted off, I stepped onto my small balcony and watched the moon rise over the waves. The past was behind us, unforgotten but no longer defining, and whatever the future held, we'd face it together. Sometimes survival isn't about running. It's about stopping, breathing, and finally seeing things clearly. Even the things you were too afraid to look at before. Back inside, I poured a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the living room window, letting the quiet wrap around me. No distant sirens, no locked drawers full of secrets, just the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of ocean wind, and the soft sound of my daughter breathing in the next room. I picked up a pen and a notebook by my first in years and began to write. Not a legal brief, not a to-do list, just thoughts, memories, hopes. Maybe someday I'd tell our story, not just the fear and betrayal, but the strength and courage it took to survive. Because we weren't victims, we were survivors, and that made all the difference.